This video is going to basically go through what the Bible says about when exactly was Satan cast out of heaven. Was Satan and those angels that fell with him, when did they get cast out? The reason I'm covering this topic, it might seem a bit like an obscure one, but I recently did a video about how Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus is Michael the Archangel. And of course, I read one of the verses in chapter 12 of Revelation. And after that video, I thought, you know what, let's just tackle Revelation chapter 12 more, because I was reading it one day in its entirety and I was just hit by a realization or a bit of revelation around it. So there is among Christians a variety of views as to when Satan was cast out of heaven. Some think it happened really, really early on, even perhaps before Garden of Eden or around that time. Now, I don't think that's possible because the book of Job shows that Satan still has quite free access to heaven, to be in front of the throne, to have these conversations with God himself, but he's also then roaming the earth. So there's that freedom to move back and forth still in the book of Job. But in Revelation, something completely different is shown us. We are shown that there is a battle that ensues and he is then removed. When did that battle take place? That is now the exciting question. We're going to read the chapter 12 of Revelation together. I will not exhaustively pick every verse apart, but I will show you what it's saying, so then you can go and do some research and praying into it yourself and see if you agree. So I'm just putting this out there as what I think it is quite clearly saying and why. Now, sometimes, first, one thing to mention is that witnesses have a thought that Satan was cast out of heaven in 1914. Now, I'm not going to address that here, that particular timeline and calculation. I do believe it is an occultic belief, and I believe that it is not true as well. So I'm not going to even try to pick it apart. We're going to just look at what the Bible does actually say and says quite clearly and stick with that. We're not going to try and add magic to it. So in Revelation chapter 12, now where there's one thing about prophecy, the way prophecy works, that I need to also remind people who are not perhaps familiar with how the prophetic and the calling of a prophet operates, is sometimes you are given a word about the future, about something in the future. But sometimes the prophetic gifting and revelation is about something that already happened or is happening. And then it is called word of knowledge. So you're given knowledge that is supernatural. You're given knowledge of something that was happening in the spirit realm, for example. Or you're giving some sort of knowledge or information that you could not through human means have that access to. So this chapter 12 here is a very good example of how John, the elderly John, writing on the island of was it Patmos? He was imprisoned. He was given understanding, revelation of the supernatural events that had taken place before. So that gives you a bit of a timeline. We're talking about something that by the time this is written had already taken place, at least the majority of this chapter. So now I want you to really pay attention to the language used here in chapter 12 of Revelation. It says here, now a great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. The first bit I want you to notice, it says now a sign appeared in heaven. So this is not actually something that takes place in heaven. It is a sign given. Imagine that there would have been a big old screen up in heaven. It would have shown this happening. Okay, so this is not happening in heaven, but a sign is given, a vision of it is given there, of a woman crying out in labor pain, giving birth to a child. And another sign appeared in heaven, says the next verse. Behold, a great fiery dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So here's another sign. So that screen in heaven shows the woman in labor pains giving birth. The second, almost like preview video they're playing in heaven, is showing you a big dragon who is influencing the stars of heaven, and a third is cast down. That we know to be a reference to the angels that are fallen and that Satan had an influence over. And then who is this woman giving birth to a child that would rule all nations? Well, of course, it's talking of Mary giving birth to the child Jesus. And it also gives us there a little bit of what was going to happen to that child. That child would be caught up to God on his throne, which of course happened when Jesus died and was resurrected. However, it says, the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Now, why did the woman have to flee? Well, we know the story. Mary and Joseph did have to flee to Egypt. So here it is telling us that God had already prepared for that, and that she would be taken care of and fed for 1,260 days. Now, we don't know from history exactly how long they were in Egypt, but this seems to give us the number, okay, the length of that stay, which would fit. Now, these, remember, are signs in heaven. These are prophecies given in heaven, those preview videos of what's going to happen. Then we are told what actually did come to pass. So we get the prophecy and we get the fulfillment in one chapter, so that John understands exactly how it all came to pass. Verse 7, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows he has a short time. So this would have happened around the time of Jesus' birth, probably just before, because of what it says next. So it's around that time. And Jesus said at least two things that confirm that Satan had already fallen when he was on earth. So I'm going to give you those verses just in a moment. We'll just finish this passage on Revelation 12. But here, isn't it interesting how it describes that big battle that then ensues in heaven, and Satan and his angels are thrown out by Michael and his angels. So there's this big fight in heaven between the forces that are faithful to God and his kingdom and those who are not and who reject him. And they are then limited to the earth and angry because he knows he has a short time. Why? Because Jesus is about to do something incredible that turns the tables entirely and permanently on him. And when it talks here about how they would be this overcoming by the blood of the Lamb and the word of his testimony and not loving their lives to the death, that was really to just show how believers would be coping with that situation of the enemy being here and that force being here. That's why it says, rejoice the heavens, because the heavens now had peace. God's will was being done in heaven and is and continues to be. But we are waiting for that to happen and be extended here fully. But we know it will happen, and we know that we're continually gaining ground, because really legally it's already been established. Jesus already established the rights by which that is achieved, and Satan and his those spirits that followed him will all be eliminated, and eventually. And people, we're also part of that question. Now let's see what else it says in here, because I think it just ties it all together. Now, when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. So he's starting to persecute Mary and Jesus, understandably, because this is a threat to his power, or authority rather. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So Satan's not happy. He's been thrown out of the earth. Mary has gone ahead, given birth to Jesus. So she is then saved from potential catastrophe, disaster, where Herod was trying to kill baby Jesus by fleeing to Egypt, and God made it possible. For example, those expensive gifts of gold and myrrh would have given that young couple with very little means, Joseph and Mary, what they needed to flee to Egypt. We don't know exactly all the details of what they went through there, but you certainly get that feeling that she was protected, she was delivered, with the wrath of Satan coming at her. The flood here, I think, might be to do with that genocide of babies that ensued in that area, that Mary and her child were spared that because they were taken to safety. And it's interesting that it implies here a time, times and half a time, 3.5 years. That likely was the time period they were in Egypt. I don't think there is actually a way to fully prove it, but that's what it's indicating. And when it says that the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now, some of her literal children later did become believers, Jesus' brothers later on. But of course, everybody who has faith in Jesus Christ becomes an heir to the kingdom, becomes one of a big family with Jesus Christ, there with many brothers and sisters that he has given their position, redeemed them for the kingdom through his blood. So that is really interesting, because it just kind of, although primarily all of this took place back then, back in Jesus' day and just before, it also gives those references to something then was set up that would carry on through those who have that faith in God and in Jesus. So I hope you found that interesting. I'm going to give you the 2 points that I think prove that Satan absolutely had been cast out of heaven at the point where Jesus was on earth. And they're very simple ones. Do you remember with the really, really famous prayer, Our Father, that all of us know? Jesus said, "Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." So he already confidently said there in Matthew 6, quite early on in his ministry and teaching, that God's will was already taking place in heaven. So Satan can't have possibly been having access any longer. Satan and the fallen angels would have been removed from heaven for God's will to be taking place there. There was no longer that mutiny happening there. They'd been confined to the earth. And then later on with Luke 10, where Jesus has sent out the 70 to declare that the kingdom of God is near and do many signs and preach. And then when they returned victoriously and said, even the demons were made subject to us using your name, that's when Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. So Jesus is saying, I saw him fall from heaven. He had past tense, he'd already fallen. And that's why the 70 were able to do what they were able to do. And it was really like a very powerful prophetic thing they did, really deep actually. And I'll maybe go into more the meaning of the number 70, especially at some point. But that, again, it's just another piece to the puzzle that Satan was already removed from heaven at that point. So I hope you found that interesting. As I said, there's many varied views out there about when it might have happened. I think the scriptures are quite clear. I also think that it's very clear here in Revelation 12 that the woman is Mary, Jesus' mother. I know that some people try and interpret that in different ways. I'm not saying there might not be another meaning to this passage. That is possible. But certainly when I read it, all those pieces just fell together and I was like, this is what the word of knowledge revelation given to John was, simply an explanation of what had already come to pass and how it would impact believers in the future, just to explain to us what happened in the invisible spirit realm. So there you go. I hope you found that interesting. Do hit the comments section. I'm sure it will be lively as always, and you will share your views with me. But primarily, I would say, I hope I whet your appetite to read chapter 12 of Revelation, pray into it, and see and ask absolutely for confirmation on what I've said.